The Honorable Joseph Were is from the Office of the Chief Registrar of the Judiciary, and he's here with us in the studio. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Thank you very much.
Make yourself comfortable in the hot seats of
Thank
the
you.
Situation Room.
I hope I won't sweat.
No, it's good to sweat. Sweat is actually healthy.
It's a good thing.
It's a good thing, you know.
Yeah.
Feel free.
Thank you very much.
Honorable Were, you are from the Office of the Chief Registrar of the Judiciary.
That's true.
You are not the Chief Registrar of the Judiciary.
I am not the Chief Registrar of the Judiciary, not even the Deputy.
It's not even the Deputy.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So how many people then are in the Office of the Chief Registrar of the Judiciary? Let's start with this Office of the Chief Registrar of the Judiciary. For people who know that, well, there's a Chief Registrar of the Judiciary, there is the Chief Justice, there are other registrars of the various courts. There's one now who's telling us where to apply if we want to petition the presidential election.
That's
the
true.
Registrar of the Supreme Court. So tell us, this one, the CRJ, what's its office?
Now, the Chief Registrar of the Judiciary is the accounting officer of the Judiciary, and he's like the PS. We have PS in the ministries, and all issues in terms of management and oversight, day-to-day oversight, fall under that office, are currently occupied by Madam Anna Madi. And all registrars report administratively to her. Each registrar is in charge of a court. We have a registrar in charge of the Supreme Court. We have a registrar in charge of the Court of Appeal. We have a registrar in charge of the High Court and the Employment and Labor Relations Court and the Environment and Land Court. We have a registrar in charge of the Magistrates Court. We have a registrar in charge of the tribunals. We have a registrar currently also in charge of the Kenya Judiciary Academy. We have a registrar in charge of the small claims courts. And recently also we have a registrar, though acting, in charge of court-annexed mediation. So they all report administratively to the Chief Registrar. She's also assisted by directors. We have directors in the various directorates in charge of various functions, the HR, supply chain, we have ICT, we have a new one which is coming up called Security and Administrative Services, among others. So administratively, they all report to her. But in addition to that, the registrars also report to their respective, what I would call presidents or presiding judges of the various courts on some of the day-to-day aspects of their courts in terms of ensuring that their courts are effective and are able to discharge their mandate sufficiently. Thank you.
So what do you do there? You as well.
I do many things. Principally, I'm a magistrate,
Right.
but currently undertaking administrative responsibilities. Basically, I help the Chief Registrar in the day-to-day management of her office because she's not able to every day wake up and find out who has a pen and who doesn't have a pen, who has paper. And basically, I help her in day-to-day running of her office. I also help her in coordinating her office and the issues that come from the registrars and the directorates on a day-to-day basis, the routine issues that do not require her to look at, those that already have regulations and mechanisms of handling, including giving back information, facilitating them, and basically ensure that every registry and directorate is able to function effectively. I also currently help in legal issues in that office, being able to ensure that we are compliant with our various requirements, statutory or otherwise. I also look at matters that come against the judiciary so that I'm able to advise the Chief Registrar on the best way to handle those matters, whether we need to engage, whether we need to defend, whether we need to file, and just engaging with the lawyers also that represent us, and that includes the Honorable, the Attorney General.
Okay.
Yes.
Sounds to me like the Chief of Staff in the Office of the Chief Registrar.
More like what we'd call a de facto Chief of Staff, not a de jure Chief of Staff.
Okay.
Yes. I hope I've not lost you.
It will come round.
We only know de facto one party state.
De facto basically says that you're performing the functions, but not with the title.
Okay.
Yes.
And the other one is when you have the title.
When you have the title.
Okay.
Yes.
And therefore the money.
yes, you're right.
This office has a big role that it plays in succession, especially of the office of the president.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
We have seen in 2013, we saw the then Chief Registrar of the Judiciary being the one who asks the incoming president to repeat after her.
Yes.
We saw the same in 2017. The incoming president being told to repeat, say what I say, don't say what you think.
Yes.
And even what I say is not what I'm just coming up with, it's what's contained in the law.
Yes.
So what is this role of the office of the Chief Registrar in the assumption of office of a new president?
Now, the Chief Registrar, by law, is required to assist the Chief Justice, before whom the President-elect takes the oath. The law provides that a new president, or even an acting president, for that matter, if there's to be one, would require to take an oath of office before assuming the responsibilities of that office. Actually, the president will take two oaths. There is one oath which you call the oath of allegiance. The second oath is the one of the due execution of the functions of the office of president. And therefore, the Chief Registrar, what you see the Chief Registrar doing on that stage is the culmination of a lot of processes. Because the process begins, like we've seen recently, with the setting in of the elections. And once the electoral body announces, then what we call the assumption of office of president committee, the one that's currently chaired by the head of public service, then effectively begins its work to prepare for the coming in of a new president. In our case now, because we are certain that it's going to be a new president, it's not because we don't have a president who was being re-elected, then necessarily there's going to be a transition. So that calls for a number of things. One, the Chief Registrar sits in that committee, in that national committee, that then prepares for that transition. They, among other things, have to ensure that the incoming president is well briefed. And but now the part that concerns the judiciary principally is to prepare for this swearing in. Without the swearing in, there's no president, basically. You will have a president-elect without the swearing in. So the purpose then, rather the point at which the Chief Registrar and especially the judiciary comes in, is to prepare for this part that is the swearing in, ensuring that the instruments of that oath are prepared, ensuring that they coordinate with the National Committee in terms of what will be the venue, that the legal aspects are taken into account, that there's actually a gazette notice issued to that effect. There is a communication from the chair of the IEBC to the Chief Justice to confirm that it is this person and the running mate who have actually won this election. Of course, that is barring any other aspects, legal aspects or challenges, once all those have been concluded. And then also ensuring that the incoming president or president-elect and deputy properly briefed in terms of the process of taking the oath, and then ensuring that on the day of the swearing in, the oaths actually are taken within the timelines provided in law between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Yes.
It's very interesting that you say this because, I mean, we've seen, multiple oaths of office then being taken, and not just in Kenya, but around the world.
Yes.
And then, would have been none the wiser because you don't realize that there's an entire process that goes into, but all we see is on the day, and then your hands are on the holy book, and then you continue like that.
Yes.
So, but I mean, getting to now see behind the scenes and know then what really happens is important. So is it then these processes that you speak of, the gazettement, the understanding, the briefings to the individuals then who would swear at any given time? why is it then that it is absolutely important for these things to happen before just, I mean, after all, you've gone through an election, it's said that you've won, you go, you swear, you take the oath, right? Mm-hmm. You have this ceremony. Why is it important for all these back end things to happen as opposed to, okay, you do your job and I'll know what I need to do and then I go in and why is it important for these processes to then take place?
Thank you. The swearing in of a president especially, and it also to an extent flows down to the governors, is actually a very solemn occasion. It's actually a judicial occasion, and that's why it's done in the presence of the Chief Justice. Now, we, as the judiciary, we are not, so to speak, in charge of the president-elect or the deputy president-elect, and therefore you need a lot of coordination with the other agencies to ensure that, number one, there is proper communication with the incoming president and deputy president. You want to ensure that the provisions that relate to the Constitution and the assumption of the Office of the President Act are also adhered to, because it would be very embarrassing, for example, if the Chief Justice were to swear in the president, and then it turns out it was done wrongly, and then it brings in a lot of what I would call a lacuna. So, will the president be president or not president?
Because the process was not followed.
Because the process was not followed. And then I don't think any country wants to be in that place. Because unlike now, when we have the president, the outgoing president, still president, although with reduced powers, there is a president. What happens if the president purports to have handed over and yet not handed over? Then we have a serious constitutional crisis.
What happens in that case? When is there a ceremony? Or is it just an assumption that the current president then hands over to the president-elect? Is there something that happens? Instruments of power then released from one to another, or does that happen behind the scenes that nobody's really aware of?
The most important aspects happen in public.
Okay.
And there are mainly two, and that is where the judiciary is involved in one of them. Where the judiciary is involved is in terms of ensuring that, number one, the oath is prepared according to the Constitution. Because we are not just making up our own words. It's not like you can decide to say, I do in a different way. There's only one way you can take the oath, and you have to take both oaths. And then the president also signs the certificate of inauguration, which is provided for under the Act.
Which president?
The incoming president.
The one who's swearing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And then for a transition, there are two important instruments that must be passed on: the sword and the Constitution. But that is now done outside the judiciary. It's done by the outgoing president, assuming that the outgoing president is present. Yes, because it's not in every situation of a transition where the outgoing president could be present. It happens for us because there was an election. The question would be, what if there was no election? If it was out of date, for example. Of course, we'd have an acting president, and then the process of transition would set in. So the instruments that are passed on to the incoming president are basically the sword and the Constitution.
So if there was no president to hand over, what happens? So let's assume that this president is taking the oath of office, but the predecessor is not present. So who hands over the Constitution to the incoming president? Who hands over the sword to the incoming president?
Two things would happen. In a practical sense, under our new Constitution, unlike under the old Constitution, there would always be a president, because
there'll be an acting,
it provides that
acting in that office.
Acting if the president is only incapacitated. But if the president is not incapacitated and has not left office, even in a transition, he remains president. In terms of the handing over of the instruments, if for any reason he would not be present, number one, it would not invalidate the oath that the president has taken, because that is what makes the incoming president president. The instrument will then have to be handed over probably in a different fora, because the outgoing president under the law is supposed to be the custodian of the sword.
These two instruments, yes.
You can give the constitution because there's always a constitution. But in terms of the sword, it's presumed that the outgoing president is the custodian, unless for any reason he has handed it over to one of his officers to ensure that there's a transition.
Maybe my mind was elsewhere when you were saying it.
Yes.
What exactly is the relevance of this oath?
This oath actually is provided for under Article 74 of the Constitution.
Which says?
And it doesn't just provide for the president, but for every state officer. That before assuming office, every state officer shall take an oath to symbolize that assumption.
Just symbolize.
Yes, but without it, you cannot assume the powers of that office.
All right. So is the oath legally binding?
It is legally binding.
Meaning the things you utter, I, so and so,
yes,
this, and the other, this,
yes,
this, and the other.
Yes.
Is it actionable? Meaning, if at some point in the history of your tenure as a state officer, there are things that could be summed up as not as being you are not keeping in tandem with the oath that you swore by law, are they actionable?
Absolutely. If you look at the aspects that deal with the impeachment of the president, that can be one of the bases. Because when the president is taking the oath, the two oaths, they both refer to compliance and upholding and protecting the Constitution, and ensuring justice for all, and ensuring that he or she will undertake their responsibilities without fear, favor, ill will. It also expects that president to be patriotic to the extent that, and that's why they take the first oath of allegiance, that they will not sabotage anything that would affect the security of this country. So if there is evidence, if there is proof that they have been able to go outside the oath that they took, then it's actually a basis of impeachment. Although that now falls under the legal aspect, not the transition aspect.
There's something you mentioned that I found particularly interesting. The process of handing over. I heard you mention that if the handing over isn't proper, what is it that would constitute an improper process in handing over, and one which would bring about a constitutional crisis, as you mentioned?
No, the transition which would bring a crisis primarily would be if the assumption part of taking the oath is not properly conducted.
And how would it be improperly conducted?
For example, hypothetically speaking.
Hypothetically speaking.
If the president-elect today walked into Harambee House or State House without taking the oath, then that would be improper.
Okay.
Yes. That means the process of transitioning from the outgoing president to the incoming president will not have adhered to the Constitution. The Constitution uses, under Article 74, is mandatory. The state officer shall.
So that's mandatory.
It's mandatory.
And in the handing over process, must the current president hand over? Does the law make it absolutely mandatory for him to hand over? And what does handing over actually, the process, what is he handing over? And what does it signify?
In a country that is led by the rule of law like ours, the Constitution and the various acts presume an orderly society.
Presumes?
Yes.
Okay.
It presumes an orderly society whereby the processes that lead to one regime to another are followed according to the law. And it's not about whether we like it or not. It's a constitutional responsibility. It's actually a constitutional duty. So that once that process sets in, then it's not about what I like or what I don't like. And let me give you a very good example. although it's a historical example. And I'm saying this because it's already in the public domain and it's in the past. In 2017, there was an annulment in the first place, or the first from the first petition. There was then a second petition, which then ratified the outcome of the second election. The same Chief Justice who led the court in annulling the first was the same Chief Justice who oversaw the swearing in
the second.
So it's a constitutional duty. It's not a whimsical duty.
You must
Yes.
perform it.
You must perform it.
And that is part of the oath that you took.
Absolutely.
When you took office,
Yes.
whether as Chief Justice, as Registrar,
And every state
or as
officer.
President.
Yes.
So the President must also be in Kasarani, or whatever the venue is,
Yes.
to hand over, unless incapacitated.
That's true.
Okay. Let's take a break. And before we take a break, let me read the two oaths. And then there'll be some questions that come out of this.
Okay.
So the first oath is the oath or solemn affirmation of allegiance of the President. And it says, I, Charles Timothy Mamboleo, in full realization of the high calling I assume as President of the Republic of Kenya, do swear or do solemnly affirm that I'll be faithful and bear true allegiance to the Republic of Kenya, that I will obey, preserve, protect, and defend this Constitution of Kenya as by law established and all other laws of the Republic, and that I will protect and uphold the sovereignty, integrity, and dignity of the people of Kenya. In the case of an oath, you conclude with, so help me God.
Yes.
I'll come to the question of what is the difference between swearing and solemnly affirming. Anyway, the second oath. Oath or solemn affirmation of due execution of office of the President. I, Charles Timothy Mamboleo, swear or do solemnly affirm that I'll truly and diligently serve the people and the Republic of Kenya in the office of the President of the Republic of Kenya, that I will diligently discharge my duties and perform my functions in the office of President of the Republic of Kenya, and I will do justice to all in accordance with this Constitution as by law established and the laws of Kenya without fear, favor, affection, or ill will. And in the case of the oath, so help me God. So let's take a break. The Honorable Joseph Were from the Office of the Chief Registrar of the Judiciary is here with us, and he's taking us through this process of assumption of office and handover of the instruments of power from one president to another president, as we are going to see in the next couple of weeks or months. This is what we want to understand. What's this process? What does it mean? 28 minutes to 8. Quick break. We'll be back shortly.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
We're talking about the process and the role of the judiciary in the assumption of office of a new president. I just read from the third schedule of the Constitution, the national oaths and affirmations, the two oaths that an incoming president or that a president takes. So it's either an oath or a solemn affirmation. What's the difference?
Now, the difference is, I was about to say the same. But basically, an oath is where the person taking the oath uses a religious book, mostly like in Kenya, a Bible, a Quran, or a Gita, at the time of taking the oath. Affirmation is where they choose to lift up their right hand and not use any of the religious books in taking the oath. That's the main difference.
That's it.
That's it. So in the actual oath, and that is part of what the judiciary does in advance, is to engage the incoming president and deputy president. The same for governors and deputy governors, to find out what is your preferred method of taking an oath, because we do not take a presumption about what they prefer, because some people are religious, but they do not, in their religious beliefs, they don't hold the Bible. They prefer using lifting up their right hands, like the Quakers.
Okay.
So those are some of the preparations we do before the actual day. So now the oath, once we have confirmed, if they are using the religious book, we'll say oath. If they're not using the religious book, we'll say affirmation. And if we are affirming, then at the end, you'll not put, so help me God.
You just end without saying, so help me.
You just enter.
But what if this person is, like you've said, they are religious, but in their religious beliefs, they don't swear using the their book.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
So I don't want to hold it, but
Yes.
it can be present. Can it be on the table and I just raise my hand?
Absolutely.
So if I raise my hand and the Bible is on the table,
Yes.
is that an oath or an affirmation?
It's an affirmation.
Because I'm not touching it.
Yes. What we do is we avail all the three actually, and the Constitution. So your left hand will be on the Constitution. So your right hand will either lift the book or lift up. So if you're not holding it, then it's an affirmation.
And both are acceptable.
Both are acceptable.
Okay.
Yes.
And both are binding.
Both are binding. Yes.
All right. So as we see these things taking place and as we see that in terms of transition, after the oath has been taken, okay, let me go back.
Yes.
Prior to the taking of the oath,
Yes.
one can assume that the instruments of power then have not been handed over to said individual and that there is little they can or cannot do. Am I right?
That is true.
After the taking of the oath, then basically everything that, are we saying now that everything that would be necessary, instruments of power, yet again, for a president to carry out his or her duty, as well as the deputy president to carry out his or her duty, then now have been handed over and then you can go ahead with your duties? Is that what we are saying now? That kind of opens the door?
Yes,
Or-
the oath is what I would say crystallizes. You're getting into that office. It's what now gives you the power to begin doing whatever your office requires you to do. You would not be given the instruments of power before you take the oath,
Okay.
because then you're not president yet.
Okay.
And for the judiciary, the role we play is to facilitate that process, where we now have the president or a governor, so that then the other processes, which include now the handing over of the instruments of power, can set in. In the case of governors, for example, under the Assumption of Governor Office of Governor Act, it envisaged that situation.
Yeah.
That the outgoing governor might not be present, might refuse to come and hand over. That does not invalidate the oath that has been taken by the incoming governor. And that's why I'm saying that the laws are presuming an orderly society. You may be dissatisfied, but if the determination has come with finality that another person must take over, then you have a responsibility. And that is why the oath is actually a very solemn thing.
Yes.
Yes, because it binds you until the last day, the last minute of your office. So it's a responsibility even on the outgoing person to ensure an orderly transition. So as we come in to facilitate in the part of ensuring that the person who has been elected actually then assumes responsibility and ensures that there is no lacuna in terms of governance, either at the national level or at the county level.
But we've seen it at the county level. And in the case, for example, of impeachment, let's say in Wajir, right?
Yes.
One governor feels that the process of impeachment has not been fair and they've gone to court. The other governor feels, well, the Senate has confirmed the impeachment. It has been gazetted, called in to come, and the judiciary is present to conduct the swearing in of the new governor.
Yes.
So the old governor is not present.
Yes.
That can also happen in the office of the president.
Yes.
In the case of impeachment. So if the president is not present, that's the question I was asking. Who brings the sword and gives the sword to the incoming person?
The
Who goes to State House to pick it?
The sword and not Uber, definitely. The sword and the Constitution are symbolic to symbolize that the person who has taken the oath
Is
now
the
is
new
assuming
holder.
office. But just like with the governors, it does not invalidate. The person becomes president. Then now, if for any reason that was to happen, God forbid, then it can be more of an administrative aspect. It may not have to be done at the open ceremony, but it would have to be done at some point.
So do I hear you to be saying that the current president doesn't need to be physically present for the swearing in to take place and for the handing over to take place? But then how do you hand over if the person who's supposed to hand over isn't present?
Now, without delving into their details,
Yes.
that is why we have the assumption of Office of President Committee. the assumption of office of President Committee is supposed to ensure the transition, including of reports, security briefings, reports from the outgoing cabinet secretaries, if any, that when the next president comes, they find a brief on their desk. They're supposed to coordinate the security of the incoming president. They're supposed to coordinate, office. Of course, we know where the office is, but are there things that the incoming president wants?
Okay.
That is the function of the assumption of the main, let me call it the main committee. So, though we sit in the main committee, our role is twofold. One, to work with that committee on the broader issues, but principally to ensure that now the act that makes this incoming elect person to be actual president or governor is actualized, to ensure that there is a smooth transition from one regime to another regime.
What would stop it from being a smooth transition? What are some of the factors that will stop this from being smooth? I mean, look, taking all these factors into consideration, the two individuals are there. What would stop it from being smooth from what you see? Because if you're there to ensure that 1, 2, 3 happens, what would stop it from being smooth?
Now, if any of the principal players, and let me zero down even on the judiciary, for a moment, the Constitution says the president shall take the oath before the Chief Justice, or in the absence of the Chief Justice, the Deputy Chief Justice. If there was no
Chief Justice,
Chief Justice, Deputy Chief Justice, that would create a crisis. Yes. Or if they were present, and God forbid again, but they didn't appear.
Yes.
Again, that would be a crisis.
That would be a crisis.
And that's why for us as the judiciary, because we deem that we should be principally the people who ensure that the transition, number one, is peaceful and is lawful.
When you say crisis, what do you mean? What is it that would actually happen that you could look at and say, okay, this is the crisis?
Now, the crisis would be that the Constitution puts an end time to an outgoing president. That end time has come. But you have not facilitated the incoming president to take office. In fact, the Constitution does not envisage a minute, for example, without a president.
Oh dear.
And that is why it is, in a proper transition then, the outgoing president ought to be present, and immediately the incoming president takes the oath, then the outgoing president term comes to an end. And the incoming president from that minute is president. We are moving from where we have a president who has come through an election, if it's outgoing, through the transition period with limited powers, now immediately to a president who has the full powers under the Constitution and under the law.
And the time frame for all this is what exactly?
Now, the time frame begins to run, a lot of it is actually in the law. It begins to run both for the president and for the governors at the point when elections are done. Elections are done concurrently under the Constitution for all the 6 positions. Now, and I'm speaking for the various scenarios, if there is no petition, then you're saying that the first Tuesday after 14 days after the declaration of the presidential results, then the president is sworn in. So even as a judiciary...
So the first Tuesday after 14 days, it has to be a Tuesday?
It has to be a Tuesday.
Okay.
Just the same way the elections is done on the second Tuesday in August of every 5th year. So it has to be a Tuesday. Then...
and when you say 14 days, does it include weekends or it excludes weekends?
It includes weekends.
Okay.
So like for us, the judiciary, how we are preparing for this transition is we are counting those days. When was the declaration made? On Monday.
On Monday.
When do the 14 days end?
Lapse.
So even if the 14 days lapse on a Monday, then the next day, Tuesday, the president ought to be sworn in. And we prepare with that
with that scenario number one
in mind.
Scenario number two.
Scenario number two is a petition. It will go through the motions, the 7 days to file the petition, the 14 days for the Supreme Court to render its decision. And if they say the decision is, the petition is not well grounded, you have 7 days to swear in the president.
Right.
Yes. If they say there is either what I heard you had discussed in the morning, the runoff and the and the rerun,
Yes.
then we go through that period. Either the 30 days or the 60 days for the two scenarios. Then the outcome, again, you have the 7 days.
We have a unique situation where 2 counties did not have an election for a governor.
Yes.
Does that timetable take into consideration this delay?
The presidential?
Oh, no. The governors.
The
governors.
When it comes to their position and their swearing in and the transition and everything else that we're speaking of.
Absolutely.
It's the same scenario.
Yes.
It's from
For
the day that election will
Now,
be
for the
held.
governors, the days are a little different. The governors, it says 10 days after the declaration, the first Thursday.
Okay.
So like in our current situation, we're actually preparing to swear in the 45 governors next week on Thursday. Because all of them were declared by, I think the last was Narok on Sunday, where the declaration was made. And maybe just for clarity, based on the decision of the Supreme Court, declaration is when the returning officer says that Eric Latif has,
Is
I'm
the winner
wishing you
of-
well.
The
governor of this particular county. Yes.
Now, so in the case of these 2 counties, Mombasa and Kakamega, it'll be from the day they hold their election.
Absolutely.
And then now we look at the day the returning
We
officer
count
says...
10 days, then the first Thursday.
Okay.
Yes.
So the Constitution is the one that establishes this assumption of office of President Committee. Or is it a
it
law?
talks about, but there's the one that actually establishes that committee is the act, we call it the Office of the Assumption of President Act,
Okay.
2012.
Who chairs this committee,
It is-
according to the law?
It is chaired by the Secretary of the Cabinet.
Secretary to the Cabinet.
Yes. And, then
And that
it
title
has-
is specific, Secretary to the Cabinet.
Yes.
Okay. If there's no Secretary to the Cabinet, then what?
You're taking me to court. But there is always a substantive or a designated. And that's why the current committee is meeting. Yes.
Because he's acting. Secretary to the Cabinet.
I don't have the instruments, so I wouldn't want to say acting or not. I'm saying that because in the past, of course you're aware, in the past you had where the head of public service
Was also
was
Secretary
also
to the
the Secretary
Cabinet.
to the Cabinet.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
So there's this title called Secretary to the Cabinet.
Yes.
And in Executive Order number, whatever the last one was, didn't have Secretary to the Cabinet.
Yes.
So what happens in that case? What if President Uhuru Kenyatta had actually not designated the head of public service to be the Secretary to the Cabinet? So are we saying that the president must have this office?
Must have either substantive or in acting capacity. Because then it would also be saying that the cabinet does not meet,
Have minutes.
which is unlikely. Yes.
You know, there's something that I'm actually belaboring a point here. There are issues that we've talked about, and the one which has stuck in my mind is a situation where our constitution doesn't provide for what next to do. Now, in a case like that, we say we have a crisis. What do we do?
That's why we have the judiciary.
The judiciary now will
The
decide.
judiciary will step in. You said you are called Ndu.
Indeed.
Indeed.
Yes.
Can come to court
Yes.
and say we have this situation. Can we have an interpretation? And depending at what level it is, it could either go to the High Court or it would go to the Supreme Court. If it directly deals with an election to deal with the president, that would go to the Supreme Court. If it's just about a constitutional interpretation about that lacuna, it will begin with the High Court. So it's only that there will be a little bit of time to wait for that interpretation to come forth. But it would definitely be resolved. I think without digressing, what we've seen our courts doing progressively is to render jurisprudence on matters and issues that were not fully envisaged even by the Constitution at the time of framing, or which may have been assumed by the Constitution even at the time of its framing.
Okay.
So the courts will always come in to render a declaration or provide a solution on the way forward.
There's an article that appeared in the papers recently. It was a Business Daily.
Yes.
It was entitled, "After 6 years of wait, Fund Hands Court Independence from Executive." They proceeded to say that the Judiciary Fund was passed in 2016. Then they also said that on that Friday, 9 billion shillings was loaded into the fund for the half-year budget 2022-2023. And it said further that the operationalization of the Judiciary Fund, in aid of planning and the timely execution of operations had begun. Now, there was a little talk here. Has the Judiciary Fund actually been activated?
That's true. From the 1st of July.
It has.
In this financial year.
In this financial year.
Yes.
Definitely there was a delay. Under the Constitution, the initial period was supposed to be within 1 year. So among the acts that were supposed to have been enacted within 1 year of the promulgation of the new Constitution. There was delay until 2016, and then getting the regulations also delayed until 2019, 2020, because you need the regulations to align various aspects that the Act, the Act gives the broad areas. The regulations now comes in to give the details, the nitty-gritties. But working closely both with the National Treasury, the Controller of Budget, Central Bank, and of course the Judiciary itself, we've been able to operationalize that act.
What does this independence therefore mean for the judiciary?
It means that we do not have to then every week, so to speak, run to National Treasury asking for exchequer. Ideally, if the government had the 3 trillion money available at the beginning of the financial year, they would have put our 18 billion in our account.
So you would have
that we just would run. But because government runs through collection of taxes, so basically what it means is that we have had an engagement whereby we have an agreed interval when they are able to disburse funds to the Judiciary Fund, so that then we do not have to go every week or every other week to tell them we need this amount of money for this, and we need this for salaries, and we need this for development to pay our contractors and pay our ICT and everything else.
So currently, as the law stipulates, what's the percentage of the national budget that goes into the Judiciary Fund?
Unfortunately, we do not have a law. Basically, we go with the appropriations done by the National Assembly. The 18 billion we have is maybe just slightly above 0.5% of the national budget.
So it goes with the whims and the goodwill of the National Assembly?
Partly, yes.
What is envisioned in the Constitution?
The Constitution, okay, in the independence that we are talking about under the Judiciary Fund was whereby understanding the available resources and the available needs, the judiciary will be able to get resources that are sufficient enough for it to undertake its core mandate of dispensation of justice and the allied services, the support services that come with it. The independence that then is envisaged is that we would have that fund envisages that we get directly from the consolidated fund. Once it's appropriated by the National Assembly, it's then loaded onto the judiciary budget. Just for a point of correction, the 9 billion is the judiciary's half-year budget of the 18 billion.
18 billion for the year.
So loading budget is not putting the 9 million in the account. You are saying that this is your budget for this year. As you work out for this half year, you have that budget to work with. Because the way government works under the Public Finance Management Act, you cannot transact until, if you don't have a budget, it becomes an offense that actually can cause one to be taken to court.
Right.
So that allows then we can be able to say, okay, our budget says we have got this amount of money for this activity. Can we then now begin our processes as we await the loading of money, or as we work with the money that we already have?
Okay.
Yes.
Would there be an instance where you have a budget? Yes, you have the 9 billion shillings. Yes, it has not been put in your account, but you've run out of the money that has been put in the account in a half year. What happens?
Now, there are a number of scenarios that can happen. One is to engage both the National Assembly and Treasury for what you call supplementary budget. That is one of the issues. Number two is to cut down on some of the things that will not critically offend the dispensation of justice. And number three, the other thing you can do is to ask the National Treasury to open up for you for the rest of the year. Because some of the issues, you would not pay them halfway. For example, if you're paying for medical insurance, you need to pay for the whole year. So you can the National Treasury can allow you to open up that item for the whole year, that you're able to pay the whole amount that is due for an item like that.
Okay.
Yes.
This has been quite enlightening. Asante sana. Honorable Joseph Were is from the office of the Chief Registrar of the Judiciary. We've been talking about the assumption of office, what we expect to see in the coming days. We know that there's a committee meeting here led by Joseph Kenywa. It also includes the Chief Registrar of the Judiciary and the role that then the Judiciary has to play in ensuring that we have a smooth transition. In this particular case, it's a transition from President Uhuru Kenyatta to the new president who will take office whenever they take office. We also have timelines for that, and he's told us about them. Keep it here for more conversations.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.